Well, in 1994, I was made redundant from Houston's. I still wanted to stay within music engraving. At this time, Sibelius had recently launched their first program for the old Acorn computers.
We first thought of doing Sibelius in the mid-1980s when we'd left school. We both studied composing at school, and so we were well used to copying out large amounts of music, which is extremely time-consuming. And having seen word processors on computers and studied programming as well, we thought we should apply the same technology to music. And we'd cast around looking at what printing technology we could use, and we'd seen pen plotters and so on. But suddenly one day, one of us saw an Apple Mac, one of the first desktop publishing systems, with a laser printer, and we suddenly realised this was the way to go.
I bought a second-hand computer, bought the program and a little printer, and I remember coming down the next morning after I bought it, not even knowing how to switch the computer on. I couldn't find the button. It was all totally alien to me. I had never ever worked with computers in my life. The nearest I'd ever got to a computer was a pocket calculator.
The best analogy for how a music program works is that it's really like a word processor for music. But the complication with music is that it has many more different symbols, many more complex rules about how the music is written down on the paper than there are for text. And so what it was possible to do with a computer program was to automate all of this process so that the person using the program really just had to input the notes and think about what the notes would be. And the computer would take care of all the complex processes of where they're positioned on the page, and could also do more subtle things, like, for example, play the music back so you could hear how it would sound. One of the most revolutionary things it became possible to do with a computer was to play the music directly into the software from a MIDI keyboard, and then it would be automatically turned into notation on the screen. More recently, it's become possible to scan music in on a scanner if you already had a printed version of it. Another major advantage of using a computer is that you can edit the music directly on screen and make quite big changes very rapidly, which with something like an engraving process is very impractical. It is quite difficult to correct mistakes. I remember an anecdote about Beethoven who finished his Fifth Symphony and sent it off to the engravers, and it's all been finalised, and then he suddenly decided to add a bar on one page, and of course it was a nightmare for the publisher. They had to scrap several pages and relay it all out again at great expense, and nowadays that would be a very simple change to make. If you think about the layout of a page of music, you might have lots of staves, say, in an orchestral score, and the position of every note on every one of those staves depends on all the other notes because of the vertical alignment of the rhythms, and that's quite different from a word processor where the position of the words on each line is more or less independent. And if you go down to the individual details, such as slurs, the position of those also has to relate to the position of notes, because the end of slurs has to be close to the notes at either end, but not touching. And if, for instance, you edit a note to move it up or down, the slur will have to follow it. Lyrics are written underneath the music, and each syllable is meant to be aligned with the note above it. But if you have a very wide word, like, for example, the word through, which has got many more letters than other syllables, then extra space has to be allowed around the note in order to ensure that the lyrics don't collide with each other. And in fact, there are various other more minor factors that may adjust the spacing around notes, such as, for example, if the note has an accidental just before it, the computer may need to allow a further extra bit of space. So all of these different factors have to be taken into account by the software, and it's much easier if it's done automatically than if the user has to go and adjust it by hand by moving the notes around with the mouse.
Anybody can use a program. You don't have to be an expert engraver. All of the layout is done automatically for you. You can edit a score directly on the screen and make big corrections. And when you have a score finished, you can of course play it back. And using a standard computer sound card or a separate synthesizer, you can get fairly realistic results. Another major advantage of using a computer is that you can automate certain tasks, such as extracting parts for an orchestra. Basically, the program can just copy out the music on one stave and produce a completely separate score for that one instrument. And this is a massive labour-saving device. It used to double the amount of time it took to produce a score when you had to do the parts separately.
But there are some disadvantages, I think, of computerization. One of them is that although computers are extremely flexible, there's nothing quite as flexible as using an ink pen on a sheet of paper. So if you come across some piece of music notation which is very non-standard, for example, a score which uses plain song or neumes or some bit of avant-garde notation which hasn't been used before and which the computer software hasn't been designed to produce, you may have to go back to doing it in the old way. Another possible disadvantage is that because anyone can buy a computer now and can buy a piece of software to write music, this means that everyone thinks that they're an expert in doing this. Nowadays, people assume that the computer will do absolutely all of this for them, but in fact, you still do need a bit of an eye for detail and an eye for how things ought to look.
I was told many years ago by the people that trained me that no two pieces of music are the same, and everyone is like a picture. Not being a musician, that's the way that I view a page of music. For layout and design, you try to make it look as clear as you possibly can to any singer, pianist, or whatever the instrument may be.
One of the latest developments in writing and publishing music, which has happened really since about the year 2000, is internet publishing. Now what this means is that instead of someone producing a score and selling it in music shops or by sending it out to people they know, it is now possible to put a piece of music directly onto the internet, which other people can go and look at on the screen. They can play it back. They can maybe even change the key or change the instruments, and then they can print it out. So really this means that people are doing the printing stage of the music themselves using their own printer instead of it being done on a printing press. This also enables publishers and composers to reach an audience right around the world almost instantly at extremely low cost.
Looking a little further ahead, there's been talk in the past of a paperless office and so on, and the application of this of music is writing a piece of music that starts life on a computer screen and ends life on a computer screen on a kind of electronic music stand. Now these objects don't quite exist yet, but we get phoned up about twice a week by someone saying, I've got a brilliant idea, and we always know what the idea is. If you would get a flat screen, maybe an LCD screen, and you could have an orchestra with these screens in front of them and play directly off the score, and maybe if it's a new piece of music, corrections could be made very rapidly, or the conductor could make corrections and they'd be instantly transmitted to the whole orchestra. The problem is a screen can malfunction, but a piece of paper on a normal stand can't.
Further off into the future, a development which may arise, perhaps due to developments in artificial intelligence, is that the computer, instead of acting as a passive tool which merely sits there allowing you to think of the notes and it simply writing them down, the computer may increasingly assist with writing the music, either perhaps in terms of skills like orchestration and arranging, for which there are fairly well-known rules, or it may be possible for the computer to become more creative and actually assist in the composing process. The person using the program will simply be sitting there listening to what the computer produces and maybe choosing what's best and what's not quite so good.
We both use Sibelius ourselves for composing on, and I personally don't regard the prospect of a program actually helping you write music as being necessarily a negative thing. It has to be said that programs already remove a certain amount of the drudgery from tasks like repeating notes, layout and so on, and this could be extended to the creative process itself. There are things like aspects of orchestration and arranging which are effectively repetitive tasks that we learn at school, and a program could certainly help with that.
Yes, I think as long as the final decision on the notes is left up to the human, then it really doesn't matter how much of the process is done by the computer.